Hi, this is Dr. Rebecca Wood, and I would like to welcome you to the Week 7 lecture. This week's themes are sin, depending on your definition of sin, and freedom, or the lack of it. And as we complete reading Things Fall Apart, this week things are truly falling apart. Okonkwo has anxiously anticipated his family's return to their home village, but he does not seem to have learned that lesson that his uncle tried to teach him when he arrived in Mabanta. Okonkwo thinks of his absence as 7 wasted and weary years. He is plotting how he can regain his status in his old village by finding prosperous husbands for his 2 grown daughters and getting his sons initiated into the Ozo society. But things have changed at home. During his absence, the white man had indeed brought a lunatic religion, but he had also built a trading store, which resulted in much money flowing into the village. And of course, this is quoted material from our book with quote marks and in-text citations. Besides their newfound wealth, the villagers were more accepting of the new religion because Mr. Brown, the first missionary, made a great effort to make friends and to try to understand the people in Africa, as well as trying to also convert them to his own religion. However, Okonkwo seems to be headed for an inevitable doom. Before he leaves his mother's home village, he gives a tremendous feast. And he overdoes it as always, and it says in the book he never did things by halves. And this would seem to be a compliment about a positive character trait. However, Okonkwo not only maybe does good things to the extreme or not by half, but he also does some bad things, and he does them in a split-second decision and often with disastrous results, such as when he killed his foster son despite having been warned not to kill the young man himself, and this brought down bad karma on him, which seems to have continued throughout the book. And then the ending, or Okonkwo's ending, is and it begins with Mr. Brown, of all people, when he gets sick and leaves. And so he's done a really good job of being reasonable and working with the people. And Okonkwo has had a personal tragedy when his firstborn son has changed his name to Isaac and gone off to school to learn to be a teacher for the colonizers. And so there's been a lot going on in the background and the foreground, and so Okonkwo's return is overshadowed by the changes caused by the white men, and he's also unable to initiate his oldest sons into the society immediately upon their arrival because that's done only every 3 years. So there's been some really unfortunate coincidences and happenings. And then, in probably one of the most unfortunate happenings, Reverend James Smith takes over the colonist church, and he's much more aggressive and not very open-minded, and he sees the world as, quote, black and white, and is, quote, greatly distressed by the ignorance of many of his flock. So he is not very interested in hearing what they have to say, and he considers them ignorant. And so you can see there's going to be a negative change in the relationship. And then there's a villager named Enoch who seems to be bound to cause trouble, and he desecrated several symbols of the old religion, including the sacred python, or at least that's a rumor that he killed and ate the sacred python. But he also begins a conflict by desecrating one of the masked spirits. And so the church is destroyed eventually, and then 6 village elders, including Okonkwo, are jailed until they pay a fine, and of course the court messengers inflate that fine so that they can take a bribe out of it. So there's a lot of things that go on that are very bad, and of course Okonkwo kills someone again in a hot-headed way, so which results in his unfortunate suicide. And you can see that just his death is not the only death to come, and that their way of life is also dying. So as we finish up this book, it's a good idea to think about what happened and why, Was Okonkwo simply a character in the novel, or is he a simple symbol of something else? Why was he so obsessed with success? And we have discussed this some already. He wanted to be wealthy. He wanted a big family with health, of course, and lots of food to feed them and to be able to share his wealth with his village, and also his physical prowess in war. And of course, there were times when he compared those who were not warriors to women rather than men. And how could his story have ended differently? And which of his children was most likely to be successful in the new world that the Christian missionaries and the Queen's District Commissioner are creating in his land? So those are some things to think about, and I'm not sure there's a good answer to all these questions or an answer that we'd be happy with, because unfortunately colonization did not result in a lot of happiness for the people who were victims of the colonization. And so the story does continue. Chinua Achebe wrote 2 more books, and they're considered the African Trilogy. And so if you enjoyed this book or would like to learn more, you could read these books as well. But of course, we will not be assigning them in class since it's week 7. And then going on to our other book that we're finishing up with this week, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. In this section of the book, Linda has left Edenton, North Carolina for New York, and she feels more free there than any time since she was a child before she realized she was a slave. And Linda and her children have been separated since her 7-year imprisonment in her grandmother's attic. And so she's seen glimpses of them and heard their voices, but she has not really interacted with them in 7 years. And in New York, Linda goes to work as a baby nurse for Mrs. Bruce, who is as kind to her as Dr. Flint was evil. And so I had to cheer as I was reading that she finally found someone who was kind to her as opposed to all the terrible things that have happened in the story. And so Linda does reunite with her children in New York. And sadly, she doesn't immediately recognize her daughter Ellen because she had changed so much in the 2 years since she had caught a glimpse of her. And Ellen also shows signs of neglect. She's living as a servant, and she has not been allowed to learn to read and doesn't necessarily have decent clothes to wear or enough food to eat. Linda's son Benny is sent north to be with his mother, but he has to meet her in Boston instead of New York because Dr. Flint is in New York searching for her. So Dr. Flint makes a great effort to get Linda back or to punish her after Linda's escape. And then Benny goes to stay with Linda's brother William because Linda must continue working to support herself, and she's hoping to make enough money to have their own home, their own apartment or home for her and her children. And during this part of the book, and if you read through to the end, which I kind of peeked and did some more reading in the book, Linda experiences both kindness and prejudice. After her imprisonment in the attic, her health had deteriorated, if you can imagine, hardly getting to move for 7 years. And when she first went to work for Mrs. Bruce, she was unable to perform her duties because her limbs swelled so painfully. And that's really scary because it sounds like a serious medical problem. But instead of dismissing Linda, Mrs. Bruce hired a doctor to help her and even befriended her, offering to provide a home for Ellen, which Linda had to reject because she was afraid of causing problems with the home where Linda lived and was a servant, and bringing down the wrath of the law or possibly exposing them to Dr. Flint. And despite the positive developments in her life, Linda still experienced prejudice and unequal treatment, as described in an incident in the dining room on the steamboat Knickerbocker, where a man told her, "Get up, you know you are not allowed to sit here." And Mrs. Bruce defended Linda and gave Linda her tea and shared with her and made her feel like a real person, but the rude words still cut deeply. And so just the dehumanization caused by slavery is detailed in this one episode, but of course we know from reading what we've read in the book that she experienced just terrible dehumanization during most of her life. And so to think about, what have we learned from reading Harriet Jacobs' story? How does reading a personal account of her life differ from reading a history book? How does it how is it different that this is not a novel? This is a person's actual life, with that Dr. Flint being a real person, just basically hunting her down until he died of old age. And so this is the works cited page for this week's PowerPoint. And I took the picture from Harriet Jacobs, which is one of our presentations, in the lecture and resources folder, so you can see the entire video. And that was a screenshot of a building in Edenton, North Carolina. And then, of course, I also used both of our textbooks as sources for this presentation. I hope you all have a great week. Take care. Thanks. Bye-bye.